Welcome back to Switzer. Time for a bit of a focus on the retail space. Now, earlier this month, the US Supreme Court ruled in favour of charging tax on online purchases. According to BDO, as a result of the decision, the level of administrative complexity for Australian online retailers with operations in the US will increase significantly. Well, for more on that, I'm joined by David Blake, tax partner at BDO in our Melbourne studio. David, thanks very much for your time this evening. Maybe just to start with, run us through the ruling in the US.
Well, it's not so much a ruling. It was the US Senate passed some laws that had been introduced each year over the last 5 years about ensuring that online vendors in the US couldn't escape the payment of sales taxes by simply not having a physical presence in those states. The whole idea was to provide some marketplace fairness as between online vendors and bricks and mortar vendors. I should say that the Act hasn't yet gone through the US House of Representatives, but it is something that has gone further than it's ever gone before.
If it does finally get passed into law over in the US, what are the implications for Australian retailers who do business online into the US?
Well, the real problem for Australian online vendors will be that there are more taxing jurisdictions in the US than just simply the 50 states. I had a conversation with someone in the US about a week or two ago who indicated that there was 7,700 taxing jurisdictions. I read today that there's 9,600 taxing jurisdictions in the US. So the thing for an Australian online vendor is that he's going to need to know about the sales and use taxes in each of the taxing jurisdictions in the US. He's going to have his systems updated to be able to deal with each of those. And even though there's a threshold to deal with the people who sell less than $1 million, once you go over that threshold, all your pre-$1 million sales will also get caught. So it's really a nightmare for those aspirational Australian online vendors who are looking to expand into bigger markets. The US is buying a compliance nightmare for them.
I mean, this is an onerous sort of a quagmire, particularly for some of the smaller operators to try and navigate through when, you know, they might only have a couple of people on staff, if anyone, trying to deal with all of these different potential laws and regulations.
Well, in part, I suspect that that's where the $1 million threshold is meant to provide some relief, but in reality, it doesn't take that much to sell $1 million worth of goods when you've got a market of 320 million people.
How important is the US market to Australian vendors?
Well, increasingly. I mean, I think we all know that Australians generally are very quick on the uptake for new technologies. I think we've embraced the purchasing online ourselves, and we're certainly seeing a lot more Australians vending online. I think we're seeing a lot of customers in the US now very clearly open to the possibility of buying online. So this will increasingly become a problem, and if it's not a problem today, that doesn't mean it won't be in a couple of years' time.
I mean, is it a big enough problem that we could actually see its force or maybe have some vendors rethink selling into the US? I mean, is it that big an issue?
Well, what's meant to be provided to online vendors is some free software that's meant to be provided by the US government to make this easier. I think the reality is that it's just another compliance cost that you're going to have to bear. Now, there are a number of responses to that. Some people could simply back out of the market. Others could take the line of least resistance and just not report. Others for whom that is not going to be a possibility will simply have to upgrade their systems. I think it's a big issue, and more importantly, if you don't have an advisor that can take you through that, you could walk into a territory that you know nothing about and end up in a lot of trouble.
Do you think there are implications for closer to home? I know, some of the peak retail lobby groups and the big retailers have been arguing or, trying to get a change to the GST threshold, for example. I mean, do you think we could see changes around regulation and tax here in Australia along the lines of the US?
Well, I suspect that this will be used as an argument. There's no doubt about that. I think the difference with our system is that we only have one single tax and we don't have it across multiple jurisdictions like the US. The other point of, and I think that's probably the main point of difference. The other piece is that whilst Australian retailers have been complaining about the capacity for people to buy $1,000 worth of goods online without GST, I'm not entirely sure that that's the fundamental difference in pricing, nor is it the thing that I think that the US is aiming at dealing with.
Well, just on what we're hearing from a lot of the retail lobby groups, I mean, do you see a change to that threshold being the panacea, if you like, for the retail sector here, outside of what we're seeing at the moment and a falling Aussie dollar? The
$1,000 threshold?
Yeah.
Well, I saw a report the other day that said that it would raise about $2.5 billion over a 4-year period, and I think that a lot of people might see a number like that and say, well, this is something we really should think about. I suspect that, though, the answer will be that that's great for the government coffers, but I'm not sure that it actually does anything for the retailer, because at the end of the day, if it was merely the 10% GST that was causing the differential in pricing, the differential in range, and the access to a broader market, I think that people would happily pay the extra GST. But I don't think that that's the thing that's the important piece for a retailer, in my personal view.
David, is that what we're seeing at the moment, be it here in Australia, be it in the US, be it in Europe, these changes to tax and changes to regulation, an attempt by governments whose coffers might be running a little bit low to boost those through the revenue off the likes of tax?
I think revenue authorities all around the world are grappling with tax systems that rely on old concepts like source and residence and permanent establishments, and dealing with those old concepts in a world where the computer and the cloud mean that they're largely irrelevant. And you're right, the revenue authorities around the world are losing tax revenues. They're grappling with these issues and they're slowly muddling their way through it.
Is it something that adds to the argument for a review and overhaul of the tax system here in Australia? It's something business groups have been calling for some time, but budget after new government, we're yet to really see any concrete widespread changes.
As a tax professional, I'm always a fan of reviews of tax systems. It's always a good source of additional work, and I think that one of the things that I suspect that has stymied the debate in Australia is the overarching requirement that all reform be done under the banner of revenue neutrality. I think that that's a significant limitation to real reform, and that's why we always end up with piecemeal reform, because you have winners and losers. I'm not entirely sure what businesses' view is about reform that doesn't have the banner of revenue neutrality across the top of it, but it would be interesting to know.
Indeed it would. Look, David Blake, great to talk. Thanks very much.
Pleasure.